Hi guys, thanks for joining me in the garden. I wanted to talk about listening to your garden, and oftentimes your garden will reveal what the space needs. And in this case, I have a few things I did this week where I just kind of listened to the garden and decided some things needed to be removed or rearranged. And one thing that prompted me to do this was my new little purchase of a very, very different kind of Alberta spruce. It's almost got tinier, neater, compact form than the other ones, which I also love. But I needed a place to put this, and of course I got a blue pot to go with it. But I realized it would look great with this Alberta spruce. But the Blackberry Lilies, which I've highlighted quite a bit in my videos, in this little corner off the deck, were just taking over the whole area, including shading out my blueberry cherry tomatoes, which are in the back. And guys, these keep producing, by the way. I don't know if you can see that, but they start kind of purplish and then they do get more red. So you may be able to see a few of those. But I digress. I needed to make a little arrangement here. And I wanted to create this little vignette. And it still is a little bit cluttered. But when I took out those Blackberry Lilies, the whole thing just became neater and more of what I wanted for this corner. And it really dictated itself. It just kind of showed me that it was too much. And I'm not worried that I took them out, even though I love them. The flowers are fleeting and the pods are lovely, but they just had really taken over this spot. They're very tall, and I should have shown a before and after, but I'm showing you the after. And down here I cut back my sorrel, my red veined sorrel, and it has seeded itself. So this is going to be a very thick border of sorrel next year. But I think I really improved the space just by listening to the garden. And I did a few other things as well. So let me show you those. One thing I had to take care of was I had two Alberta spruces that I had trimmed up because the bottoms were so damaged and they had died back, and they were $2. These little Alberta spruces cost me $2. Well, one of them ended up dying because it was in the rustic garden bed, and I realized it might have some, it might be too wet in that garden for these roots, and it was suffering, and I ended up getting rid of it. But what I did was because it was looking so bad, but this one I dug up and potted, and I think it's going to be a much better situation for it, and I'm glad I did, because now I have a little topiary over here. So, you know, when you see something's not doing well or not doing your garden any favors, it's time to change it up, and that was one of the revelations I had this week. Another thing I realized this week is my boxwood cuttings are not rooting. And I gave it some thought, and I realized that roots form when the plant needs to look for water. And we have had a very, very wet summer. And it's just been sitting in moist soil the whole time. So these plants don't have any reason to send out roots. So I decided that maybe it would help, and time will tell, to put them under cover. So I brought them up here in my polytunnel, and I'm going to hope that they root out during this cooler fall weather. Of course, things don't always like to grow when it's hot as well, but I think letting them get a little bit dry will stimulate some of that root growth on those boxwoods. So I'll have to give you an update on that and let you know if that's the case. And actually the one plant that brought me to that realization I have over here, and this one, which looks very wet now, the center one has thrown down a few roots. I dug it up just to see the progress, and it was greening up. And I don't like to disturb plants when they're rooting in, but I was curious to see, because this one I did very early on this year. and I was really expecting to see a lot of roots, but I realized that this particular container was back in an area that I was not giving extra water to. So it did have some dry periods, and I think that's why this one is the only one that show a little bit of root growth, particularly the plant in the middle. But when a plant needs water, it will send out roots to bring that water in. So hopefully by keeping these boxwood cuttings under cover and letting them dry out in between waterings, we will have more root development. The other thing I realized is, although I was enjoying watching my pumpkin vine grow and it reached the end of the bed, at least I think it was a pumpkin, it could have been some type of other squash, it was looking poorly and it was not producing any fruit whatsoever. So I will probably never know what it was, but it was time to take it out. It was looking terrible. But in the meantime, I did pop in some of my black hollyhock plants, which have gotten quite big. I put that there where the Alberta spruce was removed. And I put a second one where my second Alberta spruce was, which I have now turned into a topiary in a container. So, you know, when I took out that giant vine and the Alberta spruces, it opened up other opportunities. And I think, you know, it's really important always to be reevaluating what is working in your garden. And I think, you know, the garden will tell you what is working and what is not, and reveal to you what you need to do. Another thing that revealed itself to me was that I did not like the containers that were in the front here, flanking either side of the path. When I took away my containers, and I'm using them elsewhere, of course, I could see that it was just a really open area to walk right up and use those chairs, and I like it so much better. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, you know, do you have too many things in one area? And I think that simplifying that way just really opened it up. By the way, the Coleus is just a showstopper this time of year. This is my first year growing Coleus, and this has nothing to do with my garden revealing itself, but I have learned this year how much I love this plant. It is a lot of foliage color, and you don't have to wait for blooms. It's just always so colorful. These happen to be cuttings I took from my main plant, which is over here. That's behind here in the mushroom garden. And I just took some cuttings and rooted them in water. But look how nice it's looking back there. Isn't that nice, guys? I'll definitely be doing more Coleus. And I may try to take some cuttings, bring them in for the winter, so I have some of these next year. If not, they grow so easily from cuttings. You can just buy a few varieties, root them all over the garden, and enjoy. I hope you can hear me over the air conditioner, but I wanted to mention, and I think I briefly mentioned this in my last garden video, is that I cleaned up a lot of debris that was in the triangle garden. It was causing a situation that was the perfect habitat for earwigs, and a couple weeks later, I have to say, I think some of the plants are looking much better, and the bees are busy on the sedum. But I'm a big proponent of chopping and dropping and feeding things with, feeding things with chop and drop. But at the same time, if you're creating a situation where you're bringing in garden pests, that is not ideal. So from now on, at least in this garden, I'll just be composting what comes out of it, and then I can spread the compost on top. I'm just loving watching the bees. I had propagated a lot of autumn joy sedum, and boy did the bees love it. So this garden, because of my chop and drop technique, really could have been much fuller and nicer, and I think next year I'm just going to remember that. I have a lot of perennial plants that will come back here, and hopefully they'll be a lot fuller when I'm not creating the perfect environment for earwigs. And the last thing I realized is I had some very scraggly looking daylilies in front of the air conditioner, and I decided that the fleeting blooms that they put up weren't worth it, and that I would try to put some tall hollyhocks in there. So that's what I did, and that was what my garden told me to do. Change it out. Change out whatever doesn't work for you guys. So guys, thanks for joining me today. And I'm sure all of you are doing cleanup and changing a few things before the cold weather comes in a couple months, and this is just the time to do that. So those were what the garden revealed to me this week, and it sure was a lot of fun to revamp a couple of the areas. Fall cleanup always feels so good. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.